Some stories
This
don't
is
begin with
absolutely
screams,
outrageous.
nor with
I
visible
demand to speak to
tragedies.
the manager.
They begin with silences.
This is
With those
absolutely
silences that weigh
outrageous.
on you,
I demand
that
to speak to the
unsettle you,
manager.
that hold secrets
This is
no one else can
absolutely
see.
outrageous.
And this story,
I demand
the
to
one
speak
you
to
are
the
about to
manager.
hear, was born
This is
exactly like that.
absolutely
In an
outrageous.
ordinary
I
restaurant,
demand to speak
on
to
an
the manager.
ordinary day, but with an
This is
encounter capable of
absolutely
changing 3
outrageous.
lives
I
forever.
demand to speak to the
Because
manager.
that day, a humble
This is
waitress,
absolutely
invisible to many,
outrageous. I
decided to
demand to
do
speak to the
something
manager.
almost no one does.
This is
She stopped.
absolutely
She looked.
outrageous. I
She
demand
listened
to
to the
speak to the
silence of
manager.
a deaf woman who seemed to carry the entire world on her shoulders. What Elena didn't know was that, with a simple gesture of kindness, she would trigger a chain of events that would transform her destiny, and that of a family marked by fear, guilt, and love. Sometimes a gesture is enough. Sometimes a glance is enough. Sometimes a soul willing to see what others ignore is enough. Stay until the end. I promise you the ending will touch you deeper than you imagine. And if the stories that heal, comfort, and move your heart accompany you through difficult days, I invite you, with affection, to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of them. Take a deep breath. The story is about to begin. The morning shift had started like almost all the others, with the sound of dishes clattering in the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air, and the feeling of exhaustion settling into Elena's body even before the clock struck 8. She had been working for years as a waitress in that neighborhood restaurant, neither too elegant nor too modest, that middle ground where people enter without fear but also without expectations. For many customers, she was the girl with the apron, the one who brings the menu, the one who smiles even when the tiredness shows in her eyes. For herself, at times, she was also just that, someone who serves, who listens to orders, who collects crumbs, and who tries not to think too much about everything she lacks when she gets home and silence greets her. However, that day was not just any day. As she arranged the tables and checked that every napkin was perfectly folded, Elena felt a strange weight in her chest, as if sadness had decided to take up permanent residence there. The night before, she had argued with the landlord about her late rent. She had checked her bank account over and over again and confirmed that, even working extra hours, the money was still not enough. It wasn't only physical exhaustion. It was that constant sensation of living on the edge, held together by invisible threads that could snap at any moment. Even so, when the first customer walked in and greeted her with a good morning, she responded with an automatic smile, the one she had practiced without a mirror and without witnesses. In the kitchen, the chef shouted orders as usual, the assistants moved back and forth, the tickets piled up on the counter, and the old wall clock ticked forward with a calmness that felt almost cruel. Elena knew the restaurant's rhythms by heart. The slow start of the morning, the chaos of midday, the tense stillness of late afternoon, the heavy exhaustion of the night. That day, the owner had also warned her that they might have more customers because special dates were approaching. People went out more, ate out, celebrated. For her, however, the word celebrate felt very far from her reality. Celebrate what? The fact that she kept paying bills that seemed to multiply on their own? As she wiped down the counter for the umpteenth time, her thoughts drifted toward her life outside that place. She remembered her mother's call the week before, asking if she would visit for the holidays, and how she had hesitated before answering that she would see if she could, knowing secretly that she didn't have the money for the trip. She also remembered her younger sister, who once told her half jokingly, half seriously, that Elena seemed to live for others, always serving tables, listening to other people's problems, adapting to schedules no one wanted. There was some truth in that statement, and though Elena didn't admit it out loud, she sometimes wondered if someone, someday, would take care of her with the same attention she gave to everyone else. Despite everything, Elena had a quality that made her different without her even realizing it. She was able to look at people beyond the orders they placed. She didn't just see a coffee with milk, a daily special, or an extra side of bread. She saw trembling hands, hurried eyes, uncomfortable silences between couples, forced smiles in families trying to look happy. That ability to read what wasn't said was both a blessing and a curse, because it made her empathize with pains that weren't hers, but that she felt as if they were. And even so, very few people ever stopped to ask how she was doing. That morning, while placing silverware on a table near the window, She overheard two regular customers talking about the same topic as always: business, investments, numbers that sounded as distant to her as another language. One of them complained that the market wasn't what it used to be, while checking a stock portfolio on his phone that was worth more than everything Elena had earned in her entire life. For a moment, she felt a sting of silent anger, not because of someone else's wealth, but because of the overwhelming sense of inequality that surrounded her every day. But she took a deep breath and forced herself to focus on what she could always control: the way she treated each person who sat at one of her tables. The restaurant owner hurried past her, adjusting his tie and muttering something about a possible food critic who might show up at any moment, or maybe an important customer who could not be poorly served. Elena listened just enough to know that, once again, perfection was expected from her. Silent perfection. No mistakes, no delays, no explanations. She was used to that level of demand, and although it hurt sometimes, she had developed a kind of soft armor. She endured, nodded, and smiled. But deep down, there were days when she wished someone would care for her with the same level of detail. Around midday, the tables began to fill up. The murmur of conversations blended with the sound of dishes, cutlery, the coffee machine, the kitchen orders, and the quick footsteps of the waiters. Between trays, notes, and bills, Elena barely had time to breathe. And yet, even in the midst of that whirlwind, she kept noticing small things: a man checking his watch over and over, a woman nervously fidgeting with her napkin, a teenager avoiding eye contact with his father. Those details didn't go unnoticed by her. Perhaps because, in a way, she saw in others reflections of her own worries. In a brief moment of relative calm, while she waited for an order to be ready, she leaned discreetly against the counter and let her gaze drift outside the restaurant. Through the glass of the large window, she watched people walk by with shopping bags, coats pulled tight against the cold, colorful scarves, laughter that disappeared as quickly as it surfaced. Her world, however, was confined to that space of numbered tables, metal chairs, and a menu that repeated itself day after day. She wondered, not for the first time, if this was the place where her whole life would remain, if there was anything beyond serving dishes and thanking for tips with a polite smile. And yet, there was something that Elena never seemed to lose completely, even on her darkest days: her willingness to be kind. Not a forced kindness, but one that came from simply knowing that everyone carries something they do not show. Perhaps that is why, even when pain tightened inside her, she refused to treat anyone badly. She had learned, through hardship, that a harsh word can worsen an already difficult day, and that a small gesture, "How are you? Don't worry, take your time," can sometimes steady someone who is on the verge of falling apart. As she cleared the dishes from a recently vacated table, she felt a sharp twinge in her back and, for a moment, thought about sitting down, just for a minute. But the kitchen bell rang again, announcing another order ready, and her body reacted out of habit before her mind could complain. She grabbed the tray, arranged the plates with precision, and headed toward the assigned table. One step, then another, and another. That was how her life seemed, a succession of steps that always led her to the same place. What Elena did not know was that, in a matter of hours, a single person who would walk through that door was about to change forever the way she saw herself. And it was just when she thought the day would be like any other that the restaurant door opened in a different way. It wasn't the heavy push of someone in a hurry, nor the loud entrance of a group of friends. It was a silent presence, almost timid, that made the murmur in the dining room grow slightly distant. Elena, without knowing why, lifted her eyes toward the entrance. She could not imagine it yet, but that moment, apparently insignificant, would be the first thread of a story no one in that restaurant would ever forget. The restaurant door opened with a soft, almost imperceptible sound, but enough to catch Elena's attention, who at that moment was arranging clean cups on the shelf. It was not the kind of entrance she was used to seeing. There were no hurried steps, no lively conversations, no typical gesture of someone quickly looking for a table. Instead, an older woman, her hair carefully pulled back and wearing an elegant yet simple coat, stepped inside as if afraid to disturb, as if her presence needed permission to exist in that space full of voices and movement. Tied back, and wearing an elegant yet simple coat, stepped inside as if she were afraid of disturbing anyone, as if her presence needed to ask permission to exist in that space filled with voices and movement. From the very first moment, Elena noticed something different about her, a kind of delicacy that didn't come from luxury, but from vulnerability. It was as if this woman carried on her shoulders a silence far too heavy to bear alone. The woman took a few slow steps, looking around with a trace of confusion. Her eyes, although gentle, moved with a contained restlessness, as if she were searching for something she couldn't name, or as if the noisy atmosphere disoriented her more than usual. Elena noticed that although the woman's lips moved slightly, she made no sound. That was when she caught an important detail: the tiny, almost invisible hearing aids behind her ears. She recognized that gesture, the way the woman frowned while watching others speak, unable to follow the rhythm. It was the expression of someone who lives in a world where sounds do not always arrive, or they arrive disordered, like echoes that vanish before one can understand them. Some customers looked at the woman with curiosity, others with indifference, but no one stood up to help her. That was when Elena felt that familiar impulse inside her, that feeling that told her someone in front of her needed something more than a menu. She set down the tray in her hands, took a deep breath to steady her mind, and approached with calm steps. She didn't want to frighten the woman, but she didn't want to leave her alone in that uncomfortable situation either. She leaned slightly forward, offering a warm smile, and said, "Good afternoon," which the woman clearly did not hear. Instead of repeating the phrase, Elena chose something more human. She gently tapped the edge of the nearby table and waited for the woman to look at her. When their eyes met, Elena lifted her hand in a slow, clear greeting. The woman seemed to relax a little, as if that simple gesture granted her permission to feel safe. With a delicate nod of her head, the waitress pointed toward an available table, inviting her to sit. The woman understood and nodded, walking toward the indicated place with careful steps, like someone unaccustomed to moving through spaces full of stimuli. Elena hurried to bring her a glass of water and a menu, but as she arrived, she noticed the woman did not take it. She stared at the menu without truly reading it, as if the letters were too small or too foreign to mean anything. Elena, remembering a deaf customer she had served years ago, made a simple but powerful decision. She took out a small notebook and pen she kept in the pocket of her apron and wrote in large, clear letters, "Do you need help choosing your meal?" Then she turned the notebook toward the woman. The reaction was immediate and deeply moving. The woman's eyes filled slightly, not with sadness, but with relief. She pointed at the message, then at Elena, and finally placed a hand on her chest in a universal gesture of sincere gratitude. Then she took the pen with slightly trembling hands and wrote in shaky but firm handwriting, "Thank you for being so kind." Elena felt an unexpected knot in her throat as she read those words. It wasn't the first time she'd received a thank you, but this one felt different, more necessary, more profound. With infinite patience, Elena began explaining the menu options using simple gestures and drawings she improvised in the notebook. She made small illustrations of the daily special, the portion sizes, even the temperature of the tea or coffee, managing to make the woman smile with the innocent surprise of someone who had not received such considerate treatment in a long time. Nearby customers started to notice the scene, some with silent respect, others with an almost childlike fascination at the tenderness of that interaction. When the woman finally chose her dish, Elena took the order to the kitchen and returned to make sure she felt accompanied while waiting. She stood beside her for a few seconds, not pressuring her, not invading her space, simply ensuring she knew she wasn't alone. The woman then reached for Elena's wrist and squeezed it gently, as if she wanted to say something that words could not translate. That gesture, so small, so intimate, became etched into the waitress's heart without her yet knowing why. As she went back to attending other tables, Elena glanced at the deaf woman from the corner of her eye, making sure she lacked nothing. There was something about her that moved Elena in a way she couldn't explain, a blend of fragility and dignity, of silence and emotional weight. The woman, for her part, continued observing the restaurant with a soft expression, like someone contemplating a world to which she only half belonged. It was clear she was used to reading more gestures than sounds. Elena did not yet know it, but that woman had not entered the restaurant by chance. She was not just another customer. She was not simply an older mother trying to have lunch. Her presence was about to trigger a chain of events that would completely transform the humble waitress's life. And that change would begin with the simplest act: having seen her, having noticed her, having offered her the kind of treatment most people overlook when they encounter someone whose silence weighs more than their words. And so, as the afternoon progressed and the dishes left the kitchen, the story binding those two women was just beginning to take shape. A silent, tender, and unexpected story, one that would soon be interrupted by the arrival of someone who would alter everything: the millionaire's son who was desperately searching for his mother. As the deaf woman waited for her food, Elena felt an impulse she had rarely experienced before: the desire to stay a bit longer by her side, not because it was her job, but because something in the woman's expression stirred in her a mix of tenderness and protectiveness. There was a fragility there, a vulnerability so visible it was impossible to ignore. While she cleaned a nearby table, Elena noticed that the woman was trying to follow the conversations around her, watching the movement of people's lips as if trying to guess the content of each dialogue. The contrast between her inner silence and the restaurant's bustling noise seemed to wrap her in a different bubble from the rest of the world. It was then that Elena decided to approach her again, not out of obligation, but out of humanity. When she reached the woman's side, Elena handed the notebook back to her and wrote with sincere warmth, "I'm here if you need anything. Don't hesitate to tell me." The woman read the message slowly, as if each word were an unexpected gift. Her eyes softened, and with trembling fingers, she wrote a reply. "Sometimes it's hard, but you make it easier." Elena read that sentence with a tightness in her throat, because in those few words there was a story she didn't know, an entire life of silences she couldn't imagine. The woman wasn't asking for pity, only for a bit of understanding, a corner of the world where she didn't have to struggle to be seen. Elena then decided to do something she hadn't attempted since learning a few basic signs for an old deaf neighbor who lived in her building years ago. Moved by the moment, she raised her hands and awkwardly formed a couple of signs she remembered. "Are you okay?" The woman opened her eyes in surprise, as if the gesture were an unexpected light in the midst of the noise. Even though Elena didn't know sign language fluently, that sincere attempt was enough to make the woman smile. A smile so sweet it seemed to illuminate her entire face. With slow movements, the woman responded with clearer signs. "Yes. Thank you." And although Elena didn't understand every detail, she understood the emotion behind the message. The connection between them was silent but deep. Elena gently pointed out the dishes that passed by, describing them with improvised signs or quick sketches in the notebook. The woman laughed quietly at Elena's clumsy but creative drawings. A cup that looked like an egg, a plate that looked like a hat, a fish with more legs than fins. Precision didn't matter, the intention did. And in that intention, Elena was giving this woman something she didn't often receive: time, patience, and an authentic presence. As the food was being prepared in the kitchen, the woman picked up the notebook and wrote something unexpected. "Are you always this kind to everyone?" Elena smiled, slightly embarrassed, and replied, "I try to be. I never know what someone might be going through." The woman touched the sentence gently with her fingertips, as if that life philosophy moved her in a special way. Then she wrote, "My son says good people hardly exist anymore, but I think he's wrong." When Elena read that, her heartbeat changed. She wasn't used to receiving praise like that. Customers usually complimented the food or the service, but not her essence. And to discover that someone saw kindness in her was a gift she hadn't expected to receive that afternoon. When the bowl of soup the woman had ordered finally arrived, Elena placed it in front of her with a kind gesture and wrote, "It's hot. Be careful. If you want another dish, just let me know." The woman nodded gratefully, but before eating, she picked up the pen again and added, "It's been a long time since anyone took the time to talk to me like this." Elena felt the weight of those words like a caress and a wound at the same time. How could someone so sweet, so fragile, so polite be overlooked by the world? How many times had this woman sat alone in other restaurants without anyone noticing her need for something as simple as human attention? While the woman ate slowly, Elena stayed nearby, attending other tables but returning every now and then to make sure she was comfortable. During one of those moments, the woman pointed to the window and wrote, "My son is coming for me. Sometimes he worries too much." Elena smiled as she read this, imagining an attentive, kind man, perhaps a bit controlling, but deeply concerned for his mother. There was no way for her to know that the person about to walk through that door would change her life. The minutes passed in a warm calm, and the restaurant began to fill again with the usual noise of cutlery, conversations, and footsteps. Despite the growing chaos, Elena always found an excuse to return to the deaf woman's table, adjusting the glass, removing a napkin, asking if she wanted dessert. The woman noticed and smiled with silent gratitude, as if the gesture of that young waitress had been a ray of light on a particularly dark day. It was during one of those returns that the woman, with a trembling gesture, touched the back of Elena's hand. Then she wrote, "You are very special." Elena wanted to respond with something worthy of those words, but nothing seemed enough. She placed a hand over her chest, and then on the table in a gesture of deep gratitude, hoping the woman would understand what her voice couldn't fully express. And the woman understood, because some emotions require no sound. Then, suddenly, the woman's expression changed. Her gaze lifted, fixed on the restaurant door. It was just a second, but it was enough for Elena to notice that something important was about to happen. Because the woman began writing something else, something that seemed urgent. But before she could finish, the door swung open, and a man rushed in, scanning the room with eyes desperately searching for one specific person. And in that instant, an instant charged with tension and fate, Elena's life began to change without her knowing it. As the deaf woman finished the last sips of her soup, Elena noticed how some customers were beginning to observe the scene in a different way. It wasn't common to see such an interaction, so delicate and full of humanity, in a place where people usually walked in, ate quickly, and left without bothering to look at anyone else. The waitress's warm gestures, the written exchanges in the notebook, the woman's timid smile, all of it had created a kind of calm around the table, as if a small oasis of tenderness had emerged in the middle of the usual bustle. Even the owner, who tended to get irritated by any distraction, paused for a few seconds to watch the scene with an unusual softness he rarely showed. Elena, without realizing it, was creating a small, everyday miracle. There was something special in the way she leaned in to understand the woman's gestures, in the way she wrote slowly so she could read without effort, in the patience with which she waited for her response. The woman, for her part, seemed to grow younger with each act of kindness. When Elena offered her a small cup of hot tea, without charging her, simply because she thought it might help warm her hands, the woman looked at her with a tenderness found only in those who have lived years feeling overlooked. It was then that one of the customers, an older man who ate there several times a week, approached Elena discreetly while she was cleaning a nearby table. "Not many people take the time to do that," he said softly, leaning toward her as if sharing a secret. Elena startled a little, not used to receiving comments about her behavior. "I'm just doing my job," she replied modestly, but the man shook his head. "No, dear, you are doing much more." His words lingered in the air, warm and heavy at the same time. The deaf woman noticed that brief exchange and lifted her gaze toward Elena, as if she understood that something special was happening around her. Then she wrote, "You make this place feel safe." Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. She wasn't used to people saying things like that to her. To her, the restaurant was just a place of hard work, a space where she survived day after day. But knowing that, for someone else, that same space could become a refuge because of her presence, that moved her in an unexpected way. As more customers became aware of the connection between Elena and the deaf woman, the atmosphere began to shift slowly. Some smiled as they watched them communicate. Others exchanged knowing glances, as if witnessing something beautiful they didn't want to interrupt. A young couple even decided to leave a tip so Elena could treat the woman to a dessert, a gesture the waitress accepted with humility, but also with gratitude. It was as if a spark of humanity had ignited and was spreading through the entire restaurant, touching even those who had arrived in a hurry or in a bad mood. The deaf woman seemed more relaxed now, even cheerful. She allowed herself to look around without the same initial tension, observing the movement of the dining room like someone taking in a harmonious scene. Elena, taking advantage of a brief moment between orders, sat beside her, just for a few seconds, and drew a small heart in the notebook, accompanied by the words, "I'm glad you're here." The woman placed a hand over her chest, moved, and responded with a sign Elena didn't know, but whose meaning she understood perfectly: gratitude. As the afternoon continued, the restaurant door kept opening and closing, but the presence of the deaf woman seemed to fill the atmosphere with an unusual serenity. Even the sound of cutlery and dishes felt softer, less harsh. Elena felt something inside her shifting too, as if her day, which had begun heavy and frustrating, was taking on a different tone. It was as if that silent encounter was returning her to her own essence, reminding her that her ability to care was not a burden, but a gift. In an unexpected moment, the woman picked up the notebook without Elena offering it and wrote something that left her frozen. "Thank you for seeing me. Many people don't." Elena felt those words sink into her heart like a truth she herself also knew. Because, in the end, how many times had she felt invisible? How many times had she wished someone would truly look at her, not as just another waitress, but as a person with dreams, fears, and wounds? Seeing that same need reflected in the woman's eyes moved her so deeply that she had to take a deep breath to stop the tears threatening to rise. Then came the gesture that would completely change the perception of everyone there. Elena, moved by the woman's vulnerability, leaned in and took her hands in hers. It wasn't an exaggerated gesture, nor something meant to attract attention. It was simple, sincere, human. The woman's hands, cold and slightly trembling, relaxed at the touch of the waitress's warm ones. That silent gesture, filled with a selfless kind of love that is rarely seen in public, provoked a sudden hush in the restaurant. As if everyone, at the same time, had stopped talking to contemplate that scene that seemed straight out of a movie. It was a brief moment, but long enough for the entire atmosphere to shift. Even the owner, who had been watching from behind the counter, froze in place, surprised by the intensity of the moment. The deaf woman lifted a gaze full of gratitude toward Elena, while her lips formed a word the waitress could not hear, but could feel. And right at that instant, when the restaurant seemed suspended in a frame of pure humanity, the door opened and an elegant man, dressed in an expensive suit and carrying an anguished expression, walked in with quick steps, desperately searching for someone. His gaze locked onto the deaf woman immediately, and everything was about to change. The silence that had formed around the table broke abruptly when the restaurant door swung open, letting in a rush of cold air and a presence that instantly captured everyone's attention. A tall man, elegantly dressed and wearing a perfectly tailored suit, advanced quickly into the room, looking around with a mixture of desperation and urgency. His dark eyes scanned each table like someone searching for something he could not afford to lose. Elena watched him from a distance and felt a slight shiver. There was something in his expression that revealed a deep fear, the kind that only appears when someone is terrified they may have arrived too late. It took the man only a few seconds to find what he was looking for. His expression lit up, or perhaps broke, when he saw the deaf woman sitting calmly with a cup of tea in her hands. In that instant, the tension in his body collapsed, as if he had been holding his breath for hours. He walked toward her with long, urgent strides, ignoring everyone else. Elena, who was nearby, could see his hands trembling slightly as he bent down to hold his mother's hands. The woman looked at him in surprise, then smiled with the tenderness only a mother can offer after fear has passed. The son, unable to control himself, began speaking rapidly, far too rapidly, moving his lips anxiously while his hands tried to reinforce his words. "Mom, I've been looking for you everywhere. You left without telling me. You worried me so much." But the woman, unable to hear his voice, understood only the anguish in his gestures. Elena, watching the exchange, felt something strange in her chest, a mix of compassion and sadness at seeing a man so used to being in control lose his emotional balance at the thought of having lost his mother. The woman, trying to calm him, placed a hand on his face and stroked it with the same delicacy a mother uses to soothe a child. Then she pointed toward Elena with a steady, almost solemn gesture. The son looked at her, confused at first, until he realized she was trying to say something. He turned toward the waitress, his eyes still glassy with worry, and looked at her for the first time. It was a brief glance, but enough for him to notice the open notebook on the table, the drawings, the carefully written messages, and the gentle gestures that had blossomed there before his arrival. Elena felt the man's gaze like an unexpected burst of air. It was not a look of judgment or superiority, although his sophisticated appearance could have suggested that. It was the look of someone who recognizes, with astonishment, that another person has done something profoundly valuable without expecting anything in return. The son swallowed hard, clearly moved, and then leaned toward his mother, trying to understand what she wanted to communicate. The woman took the notebook and wrote in large letters for him to see. She helped me. She was very kind to me. When he read those words, the impact was visible. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathed deeply, as if he needed to process what he had just discovered. Then, with a gesture charged with contained emotion, the son addressed Elena. "Thank you," he said in a tone that very few people had ever heard him use, a humble tone. "Truly, thank you for taking care of her." Elena, overwhelmed, shook her head gently, trying to downplay it. "It was nothing. I just try to help." But he firmly disagreed. "No, it was a lot. More than you imagine." And in that sentence lay a story that was not yet visible to Elena, but was beginning to emerge from the shadows. The story of a son who, despite his wealth and power, carried an immense weight on his shoulders as he cared for a mother who lived in a partially silent world. Meanwhile, the woman caressed Elena's wrist as if she needed to make sure the young waitress understood the value of what she had done. Then she wrote something else, this time slower, more thoughtful. "She looked at me." The son read the message and felt an emotional blow to the chest. Elena, confused, did not understand the depth of those words until she saw the woman's eyes glisten. In them was a painful truth, that of someone who had often been treated as invisible, as a burden, as an obstacle in a world that moves far too fast for those who need a different rhythm. The son remained silent for a few seconds, processing everything, and then he sat down in front of his mother, as if he needed to share the space with both women in order to fully understand what was happening. He looked around and saw how the entire restaurant had witnessed the scene, some with respect, others with discreet admiration for the waitress who had done what many would never have done. Stop. Take time. Truly look. Help where others simply passed by. It was then that the man took a deep breath, turned to Elena, and said with a gentle seriousness, "Very few people show this kind of kindness to her, or to anyone." And those words were not empty praise. They were the deep recognition of someone who knew exactly how difficult it was to find understanding in a world that rarely stops to listen, and even less to those who cannot hear. But what no one knew, not even Elena, was that this man had not simply come to pick up his mother. He was about to make a decision that would completely change the course of the humble waitress's life. A decision that would arise not from power or money, but from the most sincere gratitude he had felt in a very long time. And so, while silence settled once again among the three of them, fate began to turn in a way that no one in that restaurant could have anticipated. Elena, still holding the tray in her hands, watched the millionaire's son with a mixture of discomfort and surprise. Although he had thanked her for her help, something in his rigid posture, in the tension gathered in his shoulders, and in the way he clenched his jaw revealed that he was not entirely at ease. The deaf woman seemed relaxed, even content, but he kept looking around as if trying to understand how his mother had ended up there, alone, in a restaurant where no one seemed to know her. Elena felt she should clarify that the woman had been fine the whole time, but before she could say anything, the man spoke in a tone harsher than he intended. "How long has she been here? How long has she been alone?" His voice was not aggressive, but it was loaded with worry, and that made it sound more severe than it really was. Elena took a small step back, surprised by the sudden change in tone. "She arrived a little while ago." She was calm. She replied carefully, trying not to sound defensive. But the man frowned, as if trying to process that information from a place where guilt and fear dangerously intertwined. The deaf woman, unable to hear what her son was saying, looked at him with a trembling tenderness that revealed she understood his distress very well, even if she could not hear it. Elena perceived that contrast and felt a sharp sting of empathy for both of them. For him, trapped in the constant fear of losing his mother. For her, trapped in a silence that at times separated her from the world, even from her own son. The man looked again at the notebook on the table, at the drawings and messages written with such dedication. "She did all this?" he asked, pointing at the pages. Elena nodded softly. He took the notebook with trembling hands, scanned it with his eyes, and noticed the details only someone truly attentive could have made. The large letters to make it easy to read, the simple but clear drawings, the questions written with care. His expression shifted for a moment, but only for a moment. Then he returned to the rigidness that seemed to protect him from showing vulnerability in public. "My mother shouldn't be alone," he murmured, more to himself than to Elena. That was when an inevitable misunderstanding arose. A customer at a nearby table, curious about the scene, commented aloud, "What negligence, leaving a woman like her alone." Although it wasn't directed at the son, he heard it perfectly, and his face tightened. Elena saw how guilt turned into defensiveness in a matter of seconds. "I don't leave her alone," the man replied in a colder tone than he intended. "I take care of her." But the phrase did not come out as an act of love. It came out as an act of self-justification. Some customers looked at him with a mixture of judgment and confusion. Elena understood immediately what was about to happen. The man would be misinterpreted as someone insensitive, when in reality he was dominated by the terror of failing his mother. She stepped forward, gently placing herself between him and the judging eyes, and said calmly, "She wasn't alone for a single minute. She only needed a little help reading the menu." She was calm and safe. Her tone was so serene and steady that the uncomfortable atmosphere began to dissipate. The man looked at her, surprised, as if he did not expect anyone to defend him from a judgment he feared more than anything else. The woman, who had been following the scene without fully understanding it, took the notebook and quickly wrote something before handing it to her son. "Don't blame yourself. I'm fine. She took care of me." He read the message, and his eyes filled with an emotion so raw he couldn't hide it. He sat down slowly, as if the weight of having been on the verge of losing control forced him to stop. Elena felt compassion for him. She could see in his tired gaze that he was not an indifferent man, but someone who carried too many responsibilities, too many silent fears he didn't know how to express. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, looking at Elena. "It's not my intention to sound like that. It just scares me to think something might happen to her." Elena, with a gentle smile, replied, "I understand. She's lucky to have someone who cares for her like you do." The deaf woman watched the interaction between them, and, although she could not hear it, she understood every gesture, every expression. She lifted her hand and touched her son's arm to reassure him, while with the other she pointed at Elena. It was her way of saying, "She is taking care of you too." That was when the revelation came. The woman wrote in the notebook, "I didn't come here by accident." Elena looked at her, confused. The son frowned. The woman added, with trembling but firm handwriting, "I came because I needed to see if the world still had good people." Elena felt a chill. The son looked at her with wide eyes, surprised by the brutal sincerity of that statement. And then, the woman wrote something that left them breathless, and she proved it. The man remained still, as if those words had torn out a truth he didn't want to admit, that his constant worry for his mother had led him to see threats everywhere, except in the places where goodness truly existed. He looked at Elena differently, as if seeing her for the first time, and for an instant, there was a silent, profound understanding between them that needed no explanation. But the most important revelation was yet to come, because the woman, with a surprising gesture, took Elena's hand, and then her son's, and gently placed them together. Then she wrote, "You two need to learn to trust." Elena felt her stomach flip. The son did too. It was as if that woman, enclosed in a silent world, could see more clearly than everyone else around them. And so, in the middle of a full restaurant, a simple and luminous truth was revealed. Sometimes, those who live surrounded by silence hear better than anyone what truly matters. The restaurant had regained its usual rhythm, but around the deaf woman's table there still floated a different atmosphere, as if time there moved slower, more consciously, more filled with meaning. Elena remained standing beside them, although she didn't know whether she should step away or stay. There was something in the millionaire son's gaze that kept her there, a strange brightness that wasn't reproach or superiority, but deep reflection. He seemed to be seeing not only what Elena had done for his mother, but what he himself had not been able to do for a long time. Stop, observe, listen without sound, feel without filters. And that realization shook him. With a long sigh, As if something inside him had broken or been released, the man sat down in front of his mother and let his hands fall onto the table, interlacing his fingers with a gesture that betrayed vulnerability. Elena would never have imagined that someone of such high status, dressed in a flawless suit, could appear so small and so human at the same time. The deaf woman touched his wrist, trying to ease the tension she saw in his gestures, but the son seemed trapped in a mixture of guilt and revelation. Finally, he lifted his gaze toward Elena, and what he said caught her completely off guard. "Thank you for taking care of her, and for reminding me of something I myself was starting to forget." His voice was low, almost broken, but filled with a sincerity that didn't need to be exaggerated to feel real. Elena blinked, trying to process that sentence. "I didn't do anything special," she replied, as she usually did whenever someone tried to compliment her. But he shook his head seriously. "No. Yes, you did. You did something money can't buy." The words hung in the air, causing some nearby customers to look up, as if they too needed to hear them. The woman then took the notebook and slowly wrote, "She treated me as if I were important." The son read those words, and his face changed in a way Elena had never seen in a stranger. A deep, almost childlike pain mixed with the realization that he had unintentionally failed. He lowered his head and murmured, "I'm sorry." It wasn't an apology to Elena, but to his mother. An apology for all the moments in which, worried about work, business, and commitments, he had forgotten the simplicity of making her feel seen. It was at that moment that the unexpected gesture happened. The man took out his wallet, and Elena thought he was about to leave an exaggerated tip or make some financial gesture, as wealthy clients often did when they wanted to express gratitude without delving into emotions. But to her surprise, he didn't take out money. Instead, he took a small card and placed it in front of her. "This is my personal number," he said, in a tone completely different from the one he had used before. "Not because I expect you to call me for any reason, but because I want to offer you something I couldn't offer just anyone." Elena frowned, confused. He continued, "I need someone who can help me take care of my mother when I'm not around. Someone who treats her with the patience, warmth, and respect you gave her today, without even knowing who she was." The waitress felt the world stop around her. A job? Was he offering her a job? But not just any job. One that would completely change her life. One that wouldn't involve rushing between tables, or enduring shouted orders in the kitchen, or living trapped in exhausting schedules. A dignified job. A humane job. A stable one. Elena opened her mouth, but no words came out. The surprise left her speechless. I don't know what to say," she finally murmured, her heart pounding hard. The man offered a gentle smile, the first since he had run into the restaurant, and replied, "You don't have to say anything now. Just think about it. I'm not offering this out of pity. I'm offering it because my mother doesn't smile like that with anyone. And because I haven't seen anyone do what you did today when no one was watching." The deaf woman nodded enthusiastically, as if she wanted to support her son's offer. She took the notebook and wrote something that made Elena's eyes fill with tears. "I trust you." 3 words. 3 words that melted any resistance she might still have had. No one, in a very long time, had said something like that to her. Trust. A word that felt far too big for someone who had spent years feeling as though her life wasn't moving forward at all. The nearby customers, seeing the scene, began murmuring among themselves, but not with trivial surprise. Their emotion was genuine, as if they had all witnessed an important event, one of those moments that might seem insignificant from the outside, but transforms the lives of those who experience it. The owner of the restaurant, realizing what was happening, looked at Elena with an expression of nostalgia and pride, like someone who knows he is about to lose one of his best employees, but for something much better. The millionaire extended his hand toward Elena, not like a businessman making an offer, but like a human being recognizing another. "Thank you," he said again. Elena took it, feeling that this hand was offering not just a job, but a kind of bridge toward a new life. A more dignified life. A more valued life. A more seen life. The deaf woman placed her hand on top of theirs, joining them with a gesture that felt symbolic, almost sacred. And so, in the middle of a full restaurant, with plates clattering and scattered conversations around them, an act of silent kindness had triggered an opportunity none of the 3 would have imagined that morning. An unexpected gesture, born from a glance, a drawing, a cup of tea, was about to redefine Elena's destiny. What she didn't know was that this gesture, as big as it already seemed, was not the end. It was only the beginning. Elena remained there, her hands still extended and a soft tremor running through her fingers, as if her body couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The millionaire's son withdrew his hand respectfully, but not before the deaf woman squeezed it gently again, reinforcing that invisible bridge that had formed between them. Elena felt an unexpected warmth in her chest, a mix of gratitude, disbelief, and something resembling hope. She couldn't remember the last time someone had trusted her so deeply, or the last time such a big opportunity had appeared in her path without her chasing it or desperately trying to earn it. It was as if fate, silent and patient, had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The customers began returning to their conversations, but with a different tone, softer, warmer. Some looked at Elena with discreet smiles, acknowledging her kindness without needing words. Others exchanged meaningful glances, aware that they had witnessed something extraordinary disguised as something ordinary. Elena felt overwhelmed by the energy in the room, by the way everything seemed to wrap her in a light she didn't know she deserved. She brought a hand to her chest, trying to steady the rapid beating of her heart. She had never imagined that such an ordinary day could transform in such a profound way. The deaf woman picked up the notebook again and wrote slowly, as if she wanted each letter to be engraved in the waitress's soul. "Thank you for seeing me." Elena felt her throat tighten. That message, so simple and so painfully honest, touched her on a level she didn't know existed. Because she, too, had spent years waiting to be seen. Years hidden behind a tray, behind long shifts, behind a uniform that seemed to say her life had nothing special. But there, in front of that woman who lived in silence, Elena understood that they both shared the same wound, the need to exist for someone. The son, seeing his mother write that, leaned in to read it, and then lifted his gaze toward Elena with an expression unlike any he had shown before. There was more than gratitude there. There was recognition, admiration, a sincere respect that did not come from social status, but from shared humanity. "My mother doesn't trust many people," he said softly, "but she trusts you. And that means more than I can explain." Elena felt her legs tremble, and for a moment she had to lean on the table to keep from losing the emotional balance she was barely managing to hold. The restaurant owner approached at that moment, drawn by the intensity of the scene. In a low voice, he asked, "Everything all right here?" But when he saw Elena's expression, the notebook in the deaf woman's hands, and the millionaire's card on the table, he understood immediately what was happening. His eyes softened with a mix of pride and resignation. "Looks like you're heading somewhere else, huh, Elena?" She looked at him, unsure of what to respond. It was true. A new door had opened before her, but the idea of leaving behind the place that had been both her refuge and her torment for years filled her with mixed emotions. The millionaire's son, noticing her hesitation, added gently, "I don't want to pressure you. I just want you to know that what you did today isn't something you see every day, and my mother deserves someone like you near her." Elena lowered her gaze, feeling tears begin to gather on her eyelashes. The deaf woman reached out and took her hand, giving it a soft yet firm squeeze, as if trying to transmit strength through the touch. That gesture sealed something between them that words could not explain. Suddenly, a soft applause began to sound from a nearby table. Then another, and another. Within seconds, much of the restaurant was applauding discreetly, not loudly or intrusively, but with deep respect, celebrating an act of kindness that had illuminated the entire place. Elena brought a hand to her face, completely overwhelmed with emotion. Never in her life had she been recognized like this. Never had she felt that her existence had such a real impact on someone else's life. The deaf woman smiled, proud of her, and her son looked at her as if he were seeing a new, revealed version of himself. When the applause faded, the son stood up and offered to help his mother rise. She wrote one last message in the notebook before leaving. "I hope to see you again." Elena nodded, unable to say anything, but conveying with her eyes everything her voice could not express. The millionaire gave a slight bow of his head, an elegant and humble gesture at the same time, and said, "Please think about it. Don't rush. My mother would be delighted, and so would I. Elena watched them walk toward the exit, arm in arm, moving more slowly than they had entered, as if the tension of the day had dissolved into a deep well of relief. The restaurant filled again with sounds, but for Elena, everything felt softer, lighter, more meaningful. She knew her life had changed, that she could no longer see herself as the invisible waitress she had always been. Because for the first time in a long while, someone had chosen to truly see her. And that simple act had ignited a light inside her that would not fade. And so, as the afternoon fell and the restaurant went on with its routine, Elena felt something she had forgotten: hope. The feeling that the world, with all its shadows and noise, still held space for kindness. And that sometimes a single gesture could change everything. When Elena watched the deaf woman and her son walk away from the restaurant, she did not yet know that that moment would mark a before and after in her life. She didn't fully understand why they had chosen her. She didn't know what paths would open from there. But she felt, deep in her soul, that something beautiful had begun. Because sometimes destiny doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives with a notebook full of silent words, with a trembling hand seeking comfort, with an unexpected opportunity born from the heart of someone who was simply seen. Elena discovered that day that the world still keeps spaces for goodness. That even in the hardest routines, even in the heaviest loneliness, there is a place where a small gesture can become a miracle. And that what we do when no one is watching is what truly defines who we are. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you of the immense strength hidden in the everyday, I invite you to leave your like and subscribe to the channel, because here we continue sharing stories that embrace, that heal, and that remind us that we are never as alone as we think.